In some way or another, censorship will have an effect on language, but this manifests itself in many different ways. Usually, the easiest way to censor something is through some sort of organized body, like the government. On this informal and not especially scientific scale, we could perhaps place the government as depicted in 1984 on one end, but for our real-world analysis, it might be more fruitful to compare something like China or North Korea, with their high levels of censorship of press, but also monitoring of internet, writing, and messaging. However, even in these extreme cases, the monitoring would only change what people say, not necessarily how they say it. Therefore, the effect on actual language from censorship of the press doesn't necessarily affect language. Just kidding. The video's not quite over yet. While there are indeed extreme measures that a government can take, there are plenty of other ways that people can be censored that don't relate to the government instructing them to do something or intrusion of privacy or something like this. Outside of governments, there are still bodies that can work to censor people. Certain social movements try and curb language use if it is seen to be in one way or another to be used in a way that is actively bigoted or invokes distress on a consistent basis for a whole group. The effect of this is often quite successful with creating social taboos around certain words and suggesting neutral alternatives. However, this effort is often misguided, as was explained in the first ever word facts video, since according to the notion of the anti-discrimination paradigm, a word that is neutral will not stay neutral forever. Using the real-world example of how we got mentally disabled, what happened was that words like moron and idiot, which were at the time medical terms, become stigmatized due to cultural associations to having a handicap. Once this happened, they become an insult, and so people opt for a new word to become a neutral one and even a scientific term. But as the cycle continues, what ends up happening is more and more words become socially taboo. However, the practice will also not be consistently successful either, such as when the organization PETA released alternatives to phrases that had relations to animal mistreatment, but this was, at least for the time being, laughed off and even considered insulting to some. However, all of these still have limited effects. What is perhaps the most effective is to change what the literary language is altogether. In today's world, this is probably pretty much impossible to start, but throughout history, this discrepancy was not only prevalent, but encouraged for centuries. In fact, the Irish Catholic Church only started using vulgar languages, that is to say, English mostly, but also Irish perhaps, in 1965, and Latin was an influential language for hundreds of years, not only in religion, but also in science, and most of academia really. These practices were eventually phased out, but some have, in the distant past, even tried to make specific language used for philosophy. Sometimes the goal of these initiatives is to make the information universal without giving one people group too much power, but often it relates to elitism. In Greece, for instance, a dialect was used in politics and news, official documents, and everything else, despite the fact that basically nobody spoke it on a daily basis. This disparity is called diglossia, and there are countless examples from all over the world and from thousands of years ago through until today. Sometimes it has the express purpose of trying to change the spoken language, as happened a few hundred years ago when the Slavs wanted to make Romanian sound more Slavic, even though it is a Romance language. But then later on in history, the Romanians did the same to make the language sound less Slavic. However, even in the situation with English speakers writing in Latin, this means that even intelligent, literate people cannot use information, and while again this does have social and political impacts, as with all of this information, the effect is not only a lack of accessible information for many people, but also a leaching of words into the spoken language. Just consider how throughout English history, only a minority of people ever spoke Old French or Latin at any given point, but now 60% or so of English's vocabulary is from these two languages. And while there are many technical terms, especially in the field of medicine, and English grammar is influenced by these languages, ultimately it caused a dissociation of information But this style of censorship, if you want to loosen your definition, affects the day-to-day language as well, even if much of the time it isn't going to be planned. So, that is to say that even though the languages themselves are not used by all the people, writing does have a big impact on the way that people associate different words in their language. And again, while not all language is going to be from vocabulary alone, and there's many other aspects such as syntax and grammar, even these did have impacts on English over the years from Old French and Latin sources. I'd like to thank you for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like and consider sharing it so that we can get out to as many people as possible. There's also a Patreon where you can get even more content, including podcasts, more theories, and polls, etc. So make sure to tune into that for as little as $1 a month, and keep up with the always free daily blog for all of your linguistic needs. I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.